Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat and welcome po to the first ever webinar of Akademya at Bayan kontra Disinformation at Dayaan or ABACADA. So this afternoon po, we will tackle Marcos-Duterte politics, fake news and disinformation as political strategy. So alam naman po natin na habang papalapit na po ang 2022 elections ay kaliwat kanan na po yung ating trolls and disinformation drives. No? And this afternoon, we would want to dissect, analyze, and of course strategize how can we put a stop to this palalang pandemya on disinformation. So this webinar will be up until 4 o'clock p.m. And later, if you have any questions for our speakers, you can write it on our chat box here in Zoom. And para naman po sa mga manonood natin sa ating live streaming sa Facebook, pwede niyo pong i-comment yung inyong pong mga katanungan sa comment section natin sa live stream. And to provide us a webinar introduction, let me call on the convener of the ABACADA Network, Professor Gio Gia.
Maraming salamat po, Prof. Kaya, our moderator for this afternoon's webinar. And I welcome everyone here in the Zoom meeting room, the attendees of the Zoom meeting, this webinar, and all of those who are watching on social media. We are being live streamed on the Facebook page of ABACADA and our partners as well. We are being live streamed on their page, respective Facebook or social media accounts. Bigyan ko lang ng maikling contextualization gaya ng nasabi na noong launch ng ABACADA noong November 17. Ang ABACADA ay isang broad alliance ng mga academics at education workers who are committed to expose the lies, the deceit, the disinformation, the historical distortion that is propagating, especially on social media, and that caters to the benefit of certain political groups, no? And ito ring network na ito ay committed sa pag-expose ng nakikita natin sigurong posibleng dayaan sa upcoming 2022 polls, no? Maraming pinaplano ang grupo na ito, ang network na ito. Hanggang sa ngayon patuloy pang ine-expand ng network ang kanilang kasapian. Nakikipag-communicate tayo at nakikipag-usap tayo sa iba't ibang educational institutions, educational groups at mga academics, education workers, mga teachers, individuals sa loob ng education sector para makasama natin, makatuwang natin sa mga iba't ibang aktibidad ng ABACADA. Ang masasabi natin sa ngayon, no, itong webinar na ito na ginagawa natin ngayon, itong unang webinar ng ABACADA, at marami pa tayong aasahang mga susunod pang webinar na papaksain yung halalan na gagawin sa 2022 at iba-ibang dimensions, debates, and discourses tungkol sa halalan. Maganda itong pag-kick off natin ng webinar, unang webinar ngayong araw dahil ito ay tungkol nga doon sa fake news at disinformation at papaano ito nagagamit as political strategy. Particularly, makikita natin yan doon sa buwatang Marcos-Duterte kasi ang daming troll, naglipa na yung mga trolls, yung troll network and whatnot sa kanilang partido, no? So magandang ma-dissect natin yan ngayong araw. Bukod pa dito, no, i-share ko na, ipapahagi ko lang sa ating mga online viewers na gaya na nasabi ko, maraming mga plano ang network. Meron tayong binubuong voters education module na binabalak nating mag-stage ng iba't ibang seminars conducted online sa iba't ibang educational institutions. Mag-school hopping po tayo or community hopping din, iba't ibang communities and sectors para makatulong sa effort ng voters education. Hopefully, tinitignan natin yan mangyari early next year in January. And bukod pa dito, katulad ng nabanggit nung launch ng ABACADA noong November 17, sinimulan na din po natin yung fact-checking efforts ng network. Itong linggo lang na ito, sinimulan natin mag-release ng iba't ibang publicity collateral sa ating Facebook page. Ito ay produkto ng research ng mga akademiko at mga education workers na bahagi na ng network natin. at pinopost po natin, ina-update natin yung fact-checking efforts na yan online. At ang Abakada din ay nakikisangkot din sa mga existing fact-checking groups na meron na, kasi marami naman ng fact-checking groups na meron na naglalabas ng kanilang respective output sa social media. So tayo din ay nakikipag-usap sa kanila para magkaroon ng consolidated efforts on fact-checking in anticipation of the 2022 national polls elections, no? So I hope we have a very productive discussion for this afternoon. We have invited esteemed speakers for everyone who will talk about the repercussions of the propagation of fake news and disinformation on the culture, on the politics, and on the discourse, especially in social media. So I hope we have a productive discussion, at yun lamang po, ito turn over ko na ang virtual floor pabalik sa ating moderator, si Prof. Kaya.
Thank you, Sir Gio. So again, this afternoon we will be dissecting and analyzing yung different disinformation drives. No? And I believe it's not only rampant on social media, hindi lang siya sa TikTok, sa Facebook, sa Twitter, but also on the ground, yung ating word of mouth. And as a communication scholar, I'm also excited to see how different disciplines try to dissect disinformation. So sa pagdadissect na yan, tutulungan tayo ng ating tatlong speakers for today. So for our first speaker, he is an assistant professor of political science and was chair of the Department of Social Sciences in the College of Arts and Sciences, UP Manila, from 2010 to 2013. He was the youngest chair of the DSS, not DSS, to date. He headed the UP Manila Political Science Program in 2008 to 2011 and 2013 to 2014. He finished his bachelor's degree in political science in UP Manila in 2004 and is currently working on his dissertation in the Doctor of Public Administration program of the UP National College of Public Administration and Governance in Diliman. He is also a fellow of the Center for People Empowerment in Governance, a good governance think tank, National Council member of the Alliance of Concerned Teachers Philippines, and the national chairperson of the Alliance of Concerned Teachers, State Universities and Colleges, a national, progressive, and non-traditional organization of faculty and workers in the education sector in public higher education institutions in the Philippines. He is consistently invited as resource person and trainer by other academic institutions, civil society groups, media outlets, and government institutions in various seminar workshops, fora, and policy briefings. He is recognized for his achievements in teaching and public service. He is the recipient of the 2016 UP Manila Gawad Chancellor for Outstanding Faculty in Extension Service and was awarded by the UP system with the 1 UP faculty grant for teaching in public service for 2016 to 2018 and 2018 to 2021. He's been consistently recognized as one of the outstanding teachers of CAS UP Manila based on his teaching performance and was recipient of the Roberto Benedicto Professorial Chair Award in 2013 and the CAS Outstanding Junior Faculty in Extension Service in 2009. Let's all welcome Professor Carl Ramota.
Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, sir.
Sige po. Nakikita na po yung ating PowerPoint.
Opo, sir.
All right. Sige. Mukhang napahaba yung yung introduction, but allow me to start that this topic particularly resonates with faculty members, not just in the political science program, but across disciplines, programs, and even universities. Kasi napakahalaga nitong ginagawa natin na aktibidad, pangunahin dahil nais nating bigyan ng insight, paglilinaw, yung ilang mga kaganapan sa kasalukuyan Napakahalagang magbigay ng ambag yung ating mga faculty, yung ating mga mananaliksik at yung ating mga kawani sa sektor ng edukasyon. Dun sa pagtatama ng ilang mga kumakalat na mga impormasyon, no? Yung title ng ating presentation ngayong umaga is Elections as Performance, Framing Philippine Politics. No? I use the word performance pangunahin dahil we see Philippine politics in general, as a boundary-producing political performance in itself. Paano natin binabanggit yun? Sa usapin na to, tinitignan natin halimbawa yung repertoire, yung iba't ibang mga sangkap, iba't ibang mga dialogo, script, at sa gayong punto, tinitignan natin kung paano sila nagsisilbi sa isang particular na interest. Paano nila hina-highlight ang isang bagay over another, paano nila nililegitimize ang isang bagay against another, at paano nag-wield ng power, nag-exercise ng control, hindi lamang sa impormasyon, kundi sa iba't ibang mga aspeto ng politika sa ating bansa. Now, there are two important points that I want to highlight this afternoon, and this will be, or this will serve as our anchor for the entire discussion. Now, two main points. One, control over communication and meaning-making process is a footprint of power. Now, the operative word here is control, no? But how do you control these processes, no? And what are the consequences if this is monopolized by a particular individual or group of people, no? Or a particular machinery, a well-oiled machinery, established machinery. And the second point that I want to highlight is politics must always be seen in the context of existing power relations or power configurations. Now, these points will serve as our framework in discussing the topic that was given to all of us speakers, no? So naalala ko no nung pag nagtuturo ako sa Political Science 11, no? Introduction to Political Science. We always start with a question: how do you define politics, no? So what is politics per se? And from a real politic standpoint, laging binabanggit yung phrase na politics as an exercise of power, or the concept of power politics. Exercise of power, let me go further, by whatever means, no? So it may be exercised at least in three modalities, no? Commonly, we encounter the idea of politics as exercise of power through coercion, no? Or simply put, when we force a person to do something that he or she did not want to do. And second, as persuasion, no? When we convince that that is what he or she really wishes to do, no? Or letter C, when we construct incentives, when we make alternatives so unattractive that only one reasonable option remains, no? And by highlighting power as exercise of power, politics as exercise of power, commonly power is seen as something that is tangible, concrete, or in other words, manifest power that is primarily based on observable action, in a sense that A leads B to do what A wants, basically, no? But here lies one problem, no? But what if it's implicit? What if it's not readily seen or observable, no? For example, in the case of implicit power, B does what A desires, not because of anything A says or does, but because, well, one, B senses that A wants something done, and second, for any of a variety of reasons, B wishes to do what A wants done. No? So parang may sense of anticipation. That in other words, B readily accedes to or yields to whatever B wishes to do, or rather, whatever A wishes to do. But the question now is, but why B? But why did B do it? No? Bakit ginagawa ni B yun? No? Pasensya na mahilig ako sa mga ganitong klase mga examples ng A, B, or C. And here lies the difficulty in analyzing power in itself. No? Bacrac and Baratz raised the notion of an elite controlling the agenda of discussion about different groups' needs and wants. And on the other hand, Dijkstra points out that the elite might also exercise power by influencing what people want, so that inconvenient proposals never occur to them in the first place. When we launch this or when we publicize this webinar, nakita ko yung mga posts, yung post ng Abacada sa Facebook page nito, and I read the comments, no? And there's one particular comment which mentioned, sabi niya, but you're only analyzing or fact-checking a particular candidate. You're only analyzing or fact-checking a particular political group. Hindi ba pinapakita nito yung inherent na bias netong grupo? How about the concept of objectivity? No? But then, as pointed out earlier, especially in this particular slide, it goes on to show that the playing field in itself is already uneven. That there is already undue advantage. That there is a group of or a block of the political elite that is in power, that is wielding power, and that is in control of government resources. No? Very important resources, including much needed resources for political or for information dissemination. Sa mga may background halimbawa sa journalism or even in campus journalism, we know, for example, that the government has easy access, not just to information, but also in disseminating its position across government agencies and offices. Sa Senate, sa Malacanang, sa Congress, and other government agencies, there is a media beat. There's a media office stationed in these agencies and offices, no? At napakadali sa kanila i-disseminate yung kanilang position on issues of the day. In contrast, particularly to various interest groups, socio-civic organizations, activists, and so on, who have to contend basically for airtime, for recognition, for space, in order for their positions, their analysis on issues to be heard. Kaya halimbawa, itong webinar na to, it has no pretension of yung idea ng kasi dapat magpaka-objective na and that's exactly the meat of objectivity in itself. As if when we attend meetings or webinars like this, when we share our insights, we do not come from a particular or a specific political standpoint, that we do not come from a particular set of beliefs and value systems that guide our utterances, or even how we frame our analysis on a particular or given topic. No? So, but let me go back to the first point. No? What does it exactly mean to control communication and meaning-making processes and wield power? People act toward objects and circumstances based on the meanings they attach to it. It is the collective meanings that constitute the structure which organize our actions. Actors acquire identities by participating in such collective meanings. As Goffman points out, this represents a meta level of categorization of the objects of experience, which affects the meaning they have for agents and consequently the way in which they act towards them. In the process, a limited set of routines are learned, shared, and acted out. Situations then are defined, and even blame, yung paninisi, is attributed. So here, ang gusto nating i-highlight basically is elections in particular is a sort of a boundary-producing political performance. So isa siyang malaking act, isa siyang malaking drama, isa siyang well, the more popular term that's conveniently used when we describe elections, it's a circus, and wala pang hindi pa nga formally nagsisimula ang campaign period. We're already seeing snippets of this type of circus that we will be witnessing come 2022. Now, in each performance, boundaries are constructed, spaces demarcated, standards of legitimacy incorporated, interpretations of history privileged, and alternatives marginalized. And these boundary-producing practices are in fact central to the production and reproduction of the identity of the body politic and the roles that its members eventually assume. No? But this leads me to the next question. How are these practices produced and reproduced? No? Basically, it's a cycle. No? And it begs another question. Now, how is this cycle generated to begin with? No? It begins through the enunciation of master frames, no? A meta-narrative, a powerful message demonstrating, for example, the vulnerability of authorities to contention, no? Indicating that the time is ripe for them to translate their claims into actions. Perhaps mas familiar na siguro sa atin to because that's how exactly the so-called populist leaders do it, no? There are a number of possibilities to align these frames to serve as a particular interest, just like what I mentioned earlier. So, for example, sa mga communication, sa mga kaninang ating moderator si Kaya, sa mga communication scholars, no, mas madalas nila nagagamit ito sa communication theories, the concept of framing itself, no. So, halimbawa, frame bridging, no. Or basically, when you draw a connection to people with consistent but unconnected frames, no? Amplification or frame amplification, drawing the population's latent sentiments and schemas into sharper relief. Extension or frame extension by incorporating the interests of other constituents through extending their own basic frame. And finally, the more familiar, is new or coming up with new frames, manufacturing new frames or reframing. That is planting and nurturing new frames, abandoning old meanings or understandings, and reframing of erroneous beliefs or misframings. And it can also be the other way around, no? So halimbawa, sa halalan, sa eleksyon, perhaps magmula sa dagat ng basura ni Manny Villar in 2010 and even ama ng masa, parang ano yan, slip of Freudian slip yan, ama ng asa, no? Ama ng masa during the time of ERAP, parang laging ginagamit yung termino na makamahirap, no? Siguro for one particular candidate, and mahuhula naman siguro natin sa chat box, no? Ang sabi na kanyang mga malalaking tarpaulin ay panalo ang mahirap, no? So dito pa lang, supposedly they want to be identified with a particular sector or group of people who also happen to comprise a large chunk of the electorate, particularly coming from classes D and E of the population. Another another factor that is commonly used are emotions, which can also be managed and channeled to one course of action as it fuels activism, engagement, and even fanaticism. No, and now we've seen our share of fanaticism lately. No, even beyond reason, even beyond comprehension, people are asking, why do individuals and groups of people continue to subscribe or believe rather in a particular program, in a particular individual, or in a particular political party? No? I want to highlight the third bullet, no? And this is when you instill fear, when you play with fear. Now, fear is not exactly new in politics. It is a well-tested strategy, a tool frequently used by politicians and others to motivate. No? Ang mas highlight dito is how basically fear is lived and leveraged in everyday life, no? Now yung paano ba nag-i-instill ng fear, 'di ba? Siguro in local politics that is more evident, especially yung reality ng warlordism in a number of areas, no? And how eventually local politicians who, in one way or another, are connected to this armed goons, no? Kaya nga meron tayong matagal na konsepto ng private army, di ba? Sa Pilipinas. They project themselves eventually as the safekeepers, no, the saviors of their respective constituency, no, the ones who provide safety and protection. Kaya nga well, hindi pa naman malayo, no, nauso yung konsepto ng mga politiko at agimat at mga politiko na may anting. Well, by the way, if you've been to Cavite, you'll be seeing a lot of tarpaulins with that word. And apparently, it's a party list group that is connected with a politician, no? Na nagsasayaw sa isang commercial noong 2016, no? Who was charged with plunder. Sa chat box, sa comment section, banggitin niyo yung pangalan. I'm sure alam niyo, especially the ones who are living in Cavite. Well, that's already a giveaway, no? The tactic of instilling fear is accompanied by the bombardment of the public with televised speeches. For example, under the current dispensation of the president, who would berate his enemies, his critics, no? Who would utter phrases like papatayin ko kayo, no? While these are only words, no, it sends a chilling effect, not just on individuals and groups to whom they are intended to, but lately, of course, we know that the current dispensation is also fond of berating the media itself, no? At hindi lang berating, no? Kung naalala natin, yung pinaka-recent ngayon is the libel case, no? A libel case against media personnel, no? Parang hindi naman yata bago na yung libel case. That is the criminalization itself of libel and how it's used or weaponized to silence members of the media who are critical of government policies and programs, no? But kahit parang vicious cycle na itong there's still a weakness to playing the politics of fear. It's effective if you don't think about it too much. And as soon as you start to identify the pattern, no, you begin to see how obvious it is. And because of that, it's easier to spot that particular pattern, which gives lots of hope that people will be able to see around it, no? O, tingnan natin kung paano ito eventually magta-translate into votes in 2022. And finally, the mass media, no? Which serves as the battleground for meaning making, for tapping sentiments, and for framing. Now, during elections, nasa election year tayo, leading to 2022, we see the speeding up of political activity, which occurs during periods of increased contention, where information flows more rapidly, political attention heightens, and interaction amongst groups of challengers and between them and authorities increase in frequency and intensity. Now, this cycle also comes to an end, no? There's also an end to such cycle, no? And at least there are two possible reasons behind it. One is basic exhaustion, weariness, and the disillusion that comes with the dissonance between the claims and promises and the realities as they unravel, no? Which eventually leads to the dying away of the zealousness, the political zealousness, or even fanaticism that comes with it. And second is the factionalism. Now, nakita natin yan how factionalism, for example, affected the administration party. And now how it's scrambling to remain politically relevant in the weeks and months leading to the 2022 elections, no? And that's the problem, for example, with dominant or administration parties who are about to finish their term, no? Nagre-realign yung mga political forces according to prevalent interests, according to who is more powerful, who is more winnable, no? And we see a lot of king and queen makers, no? Na nagpupul ng strings, no? Some of them are pulled strings when they were reportedly stationed in Balisina Island, no? O sino 'yon? Ilagay uli sa chat box, no? Ilagay uli sa comment section, no? And this person, despite of the plunder cases, despite of the hospital arrest, no? Despite of the unpopularity for years na nasa kapangyarihan siya, continues to be politically relevant, continues to wield power, no? And is reportedly behind the current tandem which caused the humongous traffic in Commonwealth yesterday. O sino uli yung tandem na yan? Ilagay uli sa chat box na ano. Ang hirap, no, pag webinar, no, hindi kagad direct yung feedback or interaction, no? Okay, let me go to the second point, no? Nakikita mo yung picture na generations, no? Out with the old and in with the old pa rin. Sabi nga, kung circus, parang Chubibo, no? Rigodon ng politika. We see the names, the same surnames, no? If you go to the website of the House of Representatives of congress.gov.ph, pwede niyong tignan doon yung extent ng reach ng mga political dynasties across congresses, meaning as early as the Commonwealth period, even, no? At makikita natin how specific names or surnames dominated the political scene across provinces, across regions, for decades, no? And until now, no? Ang gusto ko sigurong i-highlight dito is there are two points. Para mahilig ako sa dalawang punto dati, no? At least para matandaan natin, no? 2 points that basically define or describe Philippine politics. No? One is that the common denominator, and I learned this when I was still in the undergrad. The common denominator in all stages of Philippine history and development, or the more appropriate term is underdevelopment, is the domination of a ruling few. So this points to the reality that we have an elite democracy, that we have that our government basically is captured by the elite, no, and that more importantly, foreign interests, and we're seeing this as they unravel, no, real time in the West Philippine Sea, and even with our traditional colonial master from the other side of the Pacific, shape the political, economic, and socio-cultural realities in the Philippines. No, so these two points basically summarize what Philippine political realities are all about. No, so in other words, ang gusto nating ipunto do sa kaninang that we must always see the context, or politics must always be studied or seen in the context of existing power relations or power configurations. Or in other words, it must always be understood within the larger context in which it operates. And the reality is the building blocks of political of Philippine politics in the Philippines are not political parties as they should be, no, but the building blocks are dynasties, are families, no, and that's not exactly new, no. So parang sinagot ko na yung susunod kong tanong. Ang tanong ko dapat na nakasunod is, what is the larger context that define Philippine politics? Now, kapag pinag-uusapan yung disinformation, yung fake news, para bang it's seen as the end all and be all of whatever's happening at present. But the reality is, fake news or systematic disinformation are but manifestations or tools to shape public opinion by well-oiled political groups, machineries, professional politicians, in order to perpetuate themselves in power. Now, laging dinidikit yung konsepto ng, kasi, bakit kayo nagpadala sa mga ganyang information? Bakit nyo sila binoto? Thus, the convenient excuse o yung lagi na lang na binabanggit na kasi maraming bobotante, no, simply dismissing voters as bobotante because they opted for a particular candidate or political group or political party. But then I want to highlight that this stance, this position, presupposes that there's genuine choice to begin with, that those choices are not constrained by political or by realities on the ground. Let me highlight that. Let me emphasize that. It presupposes that there's genuine choice to begin with, that those choices are not constrained by the realities on the ground. No? We must remember, naghanap talaga ako ng picture niya, and yung hinanap ko talagang picture niya, at least yung mas senior na siya dyan, are those yung mga bejeweled na picture, no? Imelda, the Imeldific Imelda, being the representation of everything that we're discussing at present, no? But we must remember that Philippine politics has always been the province of the elite, no? Di ba, kung natatandaan niyo si McCoy, no? Sabi nga niya, it's all in the family, it's all in the political family, in the dynasty, no? Philippine political parties are parties of the elite, basically. They are traditional unabashed old boys club, basically. And that electoral system in the country was a product and instrument of American colonialism and neo-colonialism. No? Lagi kasing nadidismiss na it's about the preference of the voter, but then it removes the very idea that the choices themselves were constrained, that the electoral and party systems themselves were shaped, were defined but by a particular colonial interest. No? So let me continue. Halimbawa, do I still have time, Kaya?
Last 5 minutes na lang daw,
Sige.
sir.
All right, sige. For example, we know that in 1898, the first municipal elections in the country was held in Bulacan under American supervision. Now, McCoy, who I mentioned earlier, in his book, no, All in the Family, natatandaan niyo yung kanyang isa sa mga favorite natin na reference. Allow me to quote him, from local elections in 1901 to the legislative elections in 1907 and the presidential elections in 1935, the Americans built electoral politics from the municipality upwards, thereby entrenching provincial families in both local and national offices. No, there are a number of studies from NCPAG, from ASOG at Ateneo School of Government, from De La Salle, which basically map out the extent of control by dynasties in both in local and national politics. So kung naalala nyo, si Sheila Coronel in 2007, sa isang libro niya, she came up with the 7 M's of dynasty building. And parang sort of, even if this was published more than a decade ago, parang this 7 M's basically serve as checklist for us. Kasi hanggang ngayon relevant yung list, no? That is money, machine, media and movies, murder, mayhem, marriage, meat, and mergers. No, yung 7 M's na yon. And the very type of electoral system that we have in terms of its institutional design reinforces this already intensely personalized character of election and parties. No, yung mismong choice ng electoral formula, hina-highlight niya individual candidate, and this produces quite a number of problems for all of us. No, the downside is dahil na-highlight yung individual, it enhances voter representative linkage, and according to Farrell, this close relationship may foster, and this has been the reality, pork barrel politics and more of casework. That is, instead of serious legislation, especially those in Congress, they engage in service delivery in terms of projects, civil works, and other concrete material projects, which alam naman natin na nag-generate ng kickback, no, or tompots. Not to mention that there are no genuine political parties in the Philippines, and what we're seeing, especially in the filing of candidacy and the belated substitution at yung mga pagbaback out na naganap, no, yung nakikita natin yung shifting character of membership and leadership and the absence of ideological or programmatic difference between or across parties. Now, so let me again highlight yung 2 points na binanggit ko kanina before I close. When we started, sabi natin, control over communication and meaning-making process is a footprint of power. And we've seen how through the use of, with playing emotions, with instilling fear, with controlling the media, no, among others, how these processes are controlled, no, by a particular block of the political elite, no? And yung second point, sabi natin, it's not just about the idea of spreading false information or systematic disinformation or fake news or trolling, no? But even the institutional design of systems that are in place, particularly electoral and party system, and the realities of Philippine politics in general, make it conducive for such practices, for such vicious cycle to thrive under the current setup. Having mass media, and particularly the access to social media, only reinforce this already given tendency. So let me end with liwanag and dilim. Parang nasa crossroad tayo ngayon ng saan ba tayo patungo, no? Sa iba yung kadiliman o sa isang mas promising at maningning na kinabukasan. And of course, one of my favorites is Jacinto's Liwanag and Dilim. No? Let me read this one. No? Sabi dito, treason and perversity. Gusto ko yung translation na ginamit na word ay perversity. Seek glitter in order to conceal their falseness from the eyes of the spectator. But honesty and sincere love go naked and allow themselves to be seen confidently by the light of the day. Glitter hurts and the eye and deceives. Light favors sight and shows things as they are. At ang ating ninanasas ngayong hapon na to at sa mga linggo at buwan patungo sa halalan 2022 ay sana makita natin, magkaroon tayo ng discerning eye para makita kung ano yung glitter na nangangako ng mga magagandang bagay, ngunit mapanlinlang at mapag-imbot. At sana'y makita natin yung totoong liwanag sa gitna ng kadiliman. No? Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat at mamaya po siguro kung may mga katanungan tayo at mga dagdag na mga insights or informations, they are very much welcome. And let's listen to the next set of speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Carl. And thank you for discussing how communication really controls yung current political and economical situation natin. And I really believe that even before the pandemic, disinformation already exists. It was just really amplified by COVID-19 and how we abruptly shifted digitally in 2020. Now, for our next speaker, siya ay guro ng panitikan at araling kultura sa University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Nagtapos siya ng PhD sa Asia Institute, University of Melbourne na may tuon sa panitikan, pelikula at kilusang panlipunan. Author siya ng Digmaan ng Mga Alaala at co-editor ng Hindi Nangyari Dahil Wala sa Social Media. Let's all welcome Professor Laurence Castillo.
Salamat, Kaya. Although hindi pa ako graduate, pero salamat sa advance na pagpapagraduate. So, sige. Share ko yung aking screen. Wait lang po. So, maraming salamat dun sa presentation ni Carlo kasi nailatag na niya yung, kumbaga, gusto nating maintindihan regarding sa sistema ng politika sa Pilipinas na nagge-generate ng ganitong klase ng kalagayan for fake news, for the dissemination of disinformation or sabi nga nila misinformation. No? So pinamagatan ko yung aking mas maikling pagtalakay no, sa hapong ito na political fictions and narratives of disinformation, the case of Marcos. At pinili ko yung isang famous na imahe ngayon na siguro familiar sa ating lahat, yung Marites, no? Kasi pwede nating tingnan yung paggamit ng political fictions, no, yung mga narratives ng disinformation bilang Marites electoral tactics. Kasi yung tatalakayin ko ngayon ay nakatuon sa kung paano nailatag yung naratibo ng historical distortion ng mga Marcos sa pamamaraan na very tangible, no, yung paggamit ng chismis, yung paggamit ng virtual na mga rumors, no. And this is very interesting considering that Marcos himself outlawed the propagation of rumors and gossip during the martial law period. So it's just so ironic that right now the political machinery, the campaign machinery of the Marcoses rely to a degree on the dissemination of gossip, the dissemination of unfounded facts and stories. So I would like to begin my presentation with this. I think this is a rephrasing from national artist for literature Rasil Mojares, where history is made silent, fiction takes over. Kasi nasa panahon tayo ngayon na merong tinatawag silang systematikong hermeneutics of suspicion, kung saan lahat ng mga malalaking naratibo ng kasaysayan ay sinusubukan ng tibagin, no, sinusubukan ng questionin. Namamayani yung ganitong klase ng atmosphere ng pagdududa sa hanay ng publiko na yung public sphere natin ay naging importanteng espasyo para sa produksyon ng napakaraming conspiracy theories. And many of these conspiracy theories have a particular resonance no, sa kung paano tayo nagkakaroon ng ganitong klaseng political imagination. Maganda yung translation kanina na binanggit ni Carl no, regarding yung paggamit ng perversity kasi perverted talaga yung political imagination na nabubuo dahil sa ganitong klase ng malawakang pagdududa maging doon sa mga historical facts no na hindi na talaga dapat pang kine-question dahil nandiyan na yung juridical, nandiyan na yung objective, yung mga material details no and data na supposedly ay nagsasara na ng anumang pagdududa. At tinutukoy ko dito syempre yung realidad no ng historical at ng political torture, ng political violence, ng pagnanakaw no sa panahon ng diktatura na ngayon ay sinasubject sa napakaraming conspiracy theories no. So sisimulan ko ito sa isang insidente noong September 23, 2017 sa UPLB. So medyo sinuwerte ako nung araw na ito kasi naisipan ko na umuwi ng mas maaga mula sa UPLB papunta sa aking probinsya no kasi by 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. sobrang congested na raw yung mga kalsada papuntang UPLB dahil more than 10,000 people daw ang dumagsa sa Freedom Park dahil hinakot sila mula sa iba't ibang lalawigan sa Calabarzon region dahil pinangakuan daw sila na makakatanggap sila ng tigwa 1 million pesos mula sa Marcos family. So it's just so appalling no what happened because tens of thousands of people were drawn to this event no with the belief that the Marcoses would give them money. Of course, the Marcoses would eventually deny that they had any participation sa pagpapakalat ng ganitong klase ng chismis no. Pero may sinasabi yung popularity ng ganitong naratibo nung September 23, 2017 sa kung paano tinatanggap ng sambayanan yung naratibo na hindi naman talaga nagnakaw ang mga Marcos at in fact, kung nagnakaw man sila, para silang mga Robin Hood na mga na mga figures na okay, granted they may probably be a plundering family but they are willing to return the money to the people. So this is the kind of narrative framing na nagiging mahalagang structure of narration no na pinagbabatayan ng napakaraming mga chismis, mga fake news hinggil sa Marcos family. Of course, we immediately called out the UPLB administration after this incident because ang hirap-hirap manghingi ng permit no sa mga activities sa campus tapos pinayagan nila yung ganitong klase ng activities ng isang very dubious entity na pinangalan ng Bullion Buyer Limited para mag-host ng ganitong scam no. Dagdag pa rito no nung event na ito habang yung mga tao nakasalampak sila sa Freedom Park, ayan yung isang image ka na nakunan, habang nakasalampak sila sa Freedom Park, may mga namimigay no ng mga pulyeto na nakalagay yung image ni Ferdinand Marcos tapos nakalagay doon yung mga achievements niya, mga accomplishments niya, kasama na doon yung mga discredited na mga detalye gaya ng pag-participate niya bilang isang wartime hero daw supposedly nung ikalawang digmaang pandaigdig. So this is a very grim narrative. Some of my friends were able to talk to some of the people who were herded to UPLB and ayun nga, hinakot daw sila ng truck mula sa kanilang mga probinsya with the promise that they would receive 1 million pesos per family. Although hindi naman daw ito one time big time. Nakakaano yung mga detalye, nakakatuwang balikan kasi parang meron very elaborate siya Meron daw sinabi na parang huhulugan naman daw yung promise na 1 million na hindi daw ito one time big time, parang installment naman daw siya na parang ganitong taon, 500,000 and all those things. So anyway, speaking of gold and billions, isa sa mga predominant na narratives na kumakalat sa kasalukuyan ay yung Philippine-Italiano gold no na nakikita ko to sa iba't ibang mga social media pages, sa YouTube nakakapanood din ako ng mga videos na may ganitong klaseng version nga ng kasaysayan. And of course, we understand that these narratives are part of the broader historical denialism no na sinusubukang i-interrogate yung actually incontrovertible fact na nangurakot ang mga Marcos no. So according sa Philippine-Italiano gold story na ito ay yung Pilipinas daw bahagi daw ito ng isang malaking grupo ng property, no, na tinawag na Maharlika. So kasama daw diyan yung Sabah, kasama diyan yung Borneo, at pag-aari daw ito ng isang descendants, no, ng mga Raha na ang apelyido nila ay Italiano. Tapos meron pa tong mga backstory na apparently itong si Italiano daw ay descendant daw ni Queen Victoria ng Great Britain, pero itinatapon daw siya kasi siya daw ay merong mental handicap or something. Tapos eventually daw naglakbay daw sa Europe, sa Japan, kung saan-saan tong si Italiano. Tapos meron daw siyang isang parang half Filipina Catholic na nabuntis, tapos yung anak daw, no, nung half Filipina na yon ay inampon ng pamilya Rizal. So may connection daw ito sa pamilya Rizal. So ganito ka crazy na narrative, no. And sinasabi na eventually nasa Treaty of Paris pa raw, no, yung Talyano at yung pag-aari nila ng Pilipinas. And anong connection ng mga to sa Marcos? Sinasabi ng naratibong ito na hindi naman daw kinakailangan magnakaw ng mga Marcos mula sa kaban ng bayan dahil in the first place si Ferdinand ay abogado ng Talyano. So very dubious ito, and I think, no, during the time of, was it Gloria Arroyo, one of the descendants of the Talyano claimed that there was a Pasay court ruling na nagve-verify nung claim niya na pag-aari nila ang Pilipinas. So may pinakita siyang 3 land titles. And sinasabi niya na kaya lang hindi ma-verify pa ng Pasay Court kasi nagkasunog daw sa Pasay. So nawala yung mga dokumento, yung original court ruling. Well, eventually the Solgen would parang file a TRO para i-invalidate yung ganitong klase ng Pasay ruling supposedly. So in other words, hindi talaga isang historical fact kung ano man yung claim ng Talyano. Another claim na kumakalat ngayon ay tungkol dun sa Yamashita treasure, no, na sinasabi na meron daw isang Pilipino na treasure hunter na nakita niya yung Yamashita treasure, no, at unfortunately pinakidnap siya ni Marcos, so napilitan siya na i-turn over yung kayamanan kay Marcos. So tulad nung nabanggit ko, merong particular na naratibong ina-advance, no, may narrative framework na ina-advance yung ganitong mga klaseng kwento, and that this narrative framework is actually intended to deny the reality, no, the verifiable fact of the Marcos plunder. And it's also very interesting to take note how Amy Marcos responded to these narratives, no. So ito yung sinabi niya sa isang interview noong 2018 na yun nga, ewan ko nga, pinag-uusapan, we have always been a hardworking family and it's never been a question of immense wealth. So see how, of course, they denied the reality, the veracity of these narratives, but ginamit nila ito, no, to double down on another denial, which is yun nga, to claim that they have always been a hardworking family, which is implicitly saying na hindi naman talaga kami nagnakaw kasi we have always been hardworking. I mean, probably they are hardworking, but yeah, in terms of other endeavors. So tuloy tayo sa isa pang naratibo. Interesanting detalye dun sa naunang mga chismis na binanggit ko, yung term na Maharlika, no, bilang isang name, no, ascription sa Pilipinas and neighboring islands. So ito nga, meron pang mapa ng Maharlika, no, na makikita tayo sa YouTube. So makikita natin grabe yung elaborate na pag-create ng ganitong klase ng naratibo. And also falls in line with the famous Imelda pronouncement that if she were given a chance, she would have renamed the Philippines as Maharlika. Kasi nga, sinasabi niya, yung pangalang Pilipinas ay talaga namang isang colonial name, no? Isa itong reminder ng Spanish colonialism. But at the same time, she invoked na papalitan niya nga bilang Maharlika, no? Never mind the elite connotation of this particular term. And this kind of pronouncement falls within the framework of nationalism that the Marcoses enacted during this particular period. So napakarami ng mga nasulat na pananaliksik kung paanong ginamit ng Marcos yung isang forma ng nationalismo, no, na nagtap into particular national myths gaya ng Malakas at Maganda at nag-create ng imaginary of unitive nationalism in order to aestheticize, no, the political violence, the corruption, the neoliberal restructuring that were obtaining during this particular period. So ito yung isa sa mga famous na imahe sa panahon ng mga Marcos na kinomisyon nila, no, kung saan ipinakita si Imelda bilang maganda at si Ferdinand bilang malakas. And syempre bahagi nito yung pagki-create ng bagong lipunan bilang isang uh, attempt, no, to create the Filipino nation. So by inscribing themselves within the national imagination as the mother and the father of the Filipino nation, they in effect imagined bagong lipunan as a kind of a nationalist conception that would be demarcated from the earlier nationalist frameworks of the Marcos predecessors. So babanggitin din natin, no, na itong nationalist fiction na ito ay very elite din, no, especially dun sa pag-appropriate niya ng mga mass nationalist culture gaya ng Bahay Kubo para i-edify, no, yung cultural center. So yung mga nakapunta na sa CCP, makikita natin na merong ganitong klase ng paglikha ng mga infrastructural complexes na nakadevote sa kultura gamit ang mga nationalist symbols gaya ng Bahay Kubo, among other things. And the use of the arts and the culture and the arts has also been documented by many scholars and cultural critics, no, and cultural historians bilang forma ng paglikha ng isang aestheticized na nasyonalismo na bulag naman talaga sa realidad ng kahirapan, pangabuso at karahasan ng panahong ito. Okay, so kasunod na gusto kong banggitin ay yung naratibo ng messianism na makikita pa natin until now, no, sa slogan, no, or sa platform ni Bongbong Marcos hinggil sa babangon muli, no. So itong imahe na ito ay galing sa isang millenarian group na ang pangalan ay Rizalian Brotherhood. So itong Rizalian Brotherhood ay isang Rizalista millenarian group, no, na naniniwala na si Rizal ay babalik, no. Nung namatay si Marcos, isinama nila si Ferdinand Marcos sa pantheon ng kanilang mga santo. And I think this group is based in Abra and Ilocos, and I think they are still in existence, although the last documentation of the group's activities was in the early 2000s, no. So binabanggit ko ito dahil yung projection ng messianic image ay isang mahalagang elemento sa paglikha ng mga naratibo tungkol kay Marcos. So there's also this pronouncement by one of Marcos's religious advisors na binanggit niya na Marcos was betrayed by his own people like Jesus Christ. So nilalagyan ng ganitong klaseng ecclesiastical framing si Marcos bilang biktima, no, at bilang isang martir. And this is a very interesting framing, particularly because when Ninoy Aquino died, the messianic imagery was also very powerful, no. It was also dominant during that time. So it was a kind of an answer, no, to this dominant framing of Ninoy Aquino as a martyr. And I think there are many scholars already who have talked about how his assassination provided some sort of dramatic high point in the passion narrative that is the Aquino's rise to power, no. So yung pagpo-project ng Marcos messianism ay isa ring mahalagang diskurso, I suppose, kung bakit ngayon nakikita natin na maraming mga church leaders yung nagbibigay ng endorsement sa mga Marcoses, no. I think earlier there was this image circulating about a religious leader giving endorsement, no. Pinipray over niya si Bongbong Marcos. And isa sa mga paliwanag, for example, ni a religious studies scholar, Jael Cornelio, is that yung paggamit ng move on narrative ng mga Marcos, nila Aimee, nila Bongbong, ay pwedeng tingnan, no, bilang isang statement na nakapaloob sa moral framework ng healing and forgiveness. Laging ine-emphasize ng maraming apologists, no, yung ganitong klaseng humanist narrative of reconciliation, of the need to forgive, of the need to heal. And it's as if demanding for justice is actually disruptive, no, of this process of healing. And unfortunately, a kind of reactionary Christianity would accommodate this moral framework of healing and forgiveness, and abstracting, no, yung ganitong klase ng historical escape mula sa accountability ng mga Marcos, ina-abstract ito bilang isang naratibo ng pagpapatawad. And burado syempre yung naratibo ng mga nagdedemand ng hustisya, yung mga nagdedemand na isauli yung ninakaw, yung mga nagdedemand na maikulong, mai-detain si Imelda, pati na rin yung lahat ng mga cronies na nakibahagi dun sa pagnanakaw at sa karahasan sa panahong iyon. And unfortunately, there is this reactionary Christian interpretation that is hospitable to the humanist moral framework that the Marcoses are trying to mainstream. Bukod pa dito, isa pang narrative framework na gusto kong banggitin ay yung melodrama, no? At tulad ng nabanggit ko kanina, predominant yung paggamit ng babangon muli narrative, no, bilang isang parang campaign principle, no? Parang ito yung naging campaign discourse na ginagamit ngayon ng mga Marcos, no? At pansinin halimbawa itong sinipi kong image mula sa isang Marcos apologist Facebook page, no, na binanggit si Bongbong Marcos bilang second coming ng dating Pangulong Ferdinand Marcos. So yung term na second coming pa lang ay meron ng theological undertone. Babangon muli ang inaliping lahi. So take note also yung paggamit ng term na inalipin, no, na aping-api naman talaga ang mga Marcos, no, medyo nakakahiya naman din talaga sa kanila. Ang Pilipinas ay muling makikilala bilang tigre ng Asia. So binabanggit ko ito kasi pasok na pasok yung ganitong klase ng pag-frame, hindi lamang doon sa religious framework ng second coming, no, ng mesianismo ng mga Marcos, kundi maging doon sa framework ng telenovela or teleserye. For one, the fact that the problems of Marcos dictatorship and the post-EDSA legacies, the problems of that particular historical period and conjuncture are actually reduced to the contestations between two elite families. It's already very melodramatic and very soap operatic na issue lang pala ito ng dalawang pamilya na nag-aaway, no, sa political power. So that's already very telenovela and very soap operatic in my book. So add to that the fact that there is an element of victimization, which is something that is very current within the Philippine popular cultural imagination. And the vengeance narrative that is waiting to be unleashed in the 2022 elections becomes a very powerful framework to convince people na may ganitong klaseng kaapihan na kailangang mai-correct, no? So it's as if the history has not been kind to the Marcoses and there is a need to have this kind of retribution. And Bongbong serves as the avenging angel, no? So may ganitong tayong klaseng trope sa sa cultural imagination, hindi lamang sa Pilipinas, na bahagi ng melodramatic mode. So that is probably one way kung paano ginagamit, no, yung ganitong klaseng melodramatic narrative to enhance, no, the acceptability of the Marcoses within our political imagination. And siguro, no, para na lang magkaroon tayo ng konting silip doon sa proseso, kasi these are of course narratives na nagtatap into our affective sensibilities, but it's also very important to take note of the processes that go behind this reframing. Of course, pwedeng i-deny ng mga Marcos yung responsibility nila sa pagpapakalat ng ganitong klase ng mga framing, pero it's also important to take note na merong active involvement yung mga inuupahan nilang tinatawag na architects of network disinformation, batay sa pananaliksik nila Dr. Ong and Dr. Cabañes, na tumutukoy sa kung paanong gumagamit ang mga political candidates na ito ng mga advertising agencies, mga PR strategists, no? Tapos nagtatap ito ng digital influencers, kaya ang laki-laki siguro ng kinikita, no, ng mga influencers na ang dami-dami nilang likes, or mga pages ng mga influencers na binibili ng mga politiko at nire-rebrand, no, para maging mga support pages. At syempre, yung mga community level fake account operators, yung mga tinatawag nating mga trolls, tapos grassroots intermediaries na pwede yung iba dito ay hindi naman talaga sila direktang nakikilahok dun sa proseso ng pagpapakalat or pagre-rebrand ng mga politiko, pero nagpa-participate sila bilang both receivers and framers of the political narratives that reach them. And syempre, kalahok dyan yung publiko. So maraming pera na pumapasok sa ganitong klase ng industriya. And it's also very painful to acknowledge how, for example, there's this very powerful advertising PR campaign, no, na yung millennials get to talk to martial law veterans na nanalo daw ng award. Pero apparently, the same ad agency that was responsible for coming out with that particular campaign has also been responsible for working out strategies for the likes of Bongo and Bato de la Rosa. So may ganitong klaseng Janus faced na mga participation ang ilang mga PR strategists. And of course, in order for them to come up with all these compelling narratives and to rebrand their candidates, they have to tap into the popular affective sensibilities of people and think about what kinds of narratives would appeal to the public. So also important to highlight the various discursive conditions that kind of provided some fertile soil for these political fictions. Number one, yung anti-oligarchy rhetoric ni Duterte na nakatulong, no, para sa mga Marcos, kasi sa ngayon, kapag binanggit mo yung oligarkiya para sa mga Marcos supporters at yung mga medyo unconvinced pa, they would associate it with the likes of the Aquinos. They would associate it with those that are derisively identified as members of the yellow oligarchy. Never mind the fact that, tingnan nyo, magkakatabi sila, si Duterte, si Arroyo, si Erap, si Imelda, na bahagi din sila ng oligarkiya. They are part of this broad oligarchic body that takes control of Philippine politics. But Duterte was able to kind of differentiate himself from the oligarchs associated with the yellows, and it's a very powerful rhetoric na until now ay na-encounter ko sa maraming mga loyalists online. Dagdag pa dyan, no, yung pag-generate ng imagination ng plunder bilang norm. It's normative anyway, so why should we nitpick, no? Bakit ipaparticularize mo yung mga Marcos? Lahat naman sila ay kurako. Tapos i-invoke nila yung optics of visibility na na-generate ng edifice complex, na kahit nagnakaw sila, meron ka nga namang edifice complex. So we can say that the infrastructure projects, no, na nabuo dahil sa napakaraming utang ng mga Marcos ay ginagamit ngayon, no, para i-justify kung ano man yung mga ninakaw nila, at least in the eyes of the ordinary public. So it's a kind of investment that paid off para tayong pinrito sa ating sariling mantika. Bukod pa dyan yung optics of invisibility. So when we talk to our elders, they would tell us na wala naman talagang karahasan kasi ang tanda ko lang nung panahon ng kabataan ko ay tahimik, tapos maraming mga pulis, pero payapa, because many instances of violence that took place were done under the shadow of the night. So kaya nga napaka-powerful nung ginamit nilang enforced disappearances bilang isang tactic na hiniram mula sa Latin America tapos dinala sa atin para gawing invisible yung mga karahasan, gawing invisible yung mga bangkay. And of course, perhaps the most powerful socio-political condition that enabled this kind of yearning for the Marcoses would be the failures of post-EDSA governance, which unfortunately have been associated with the Aquino administration, with the two Aquino administrations. Never mind the fact that there was Arroyo, there was Erap, and all the other political leaders who also were part of the post-EDSA system. So ito yung mga discursive conditions na naging matabang lupa para mag-create ng political fictions yung mga Marcos. So I would like to end my very brief presentation with never again and never forget. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Prof. Lawrence. And I think my greatest takeaway from Professor Lawrence's talk is how stories are now more powerful than facts. And I think we have been experiencing this lalo pa ngayong pandemya na mas mabigat na yung kwento ng ating kapitbahay regarding sa mga herbal medicines, etc. kesa doon sa kung ano yung sinasabi ng mga doctors. And also, yung battle of generations in terms of narratives, lalo pa dito sa nangyari during the martial law na yung experience ng mga lolos and lolas natin ay binabangga doon sa experiences ng mga nanays and tatays natin. And ngayon, to the outright dismissal nung lahat ng issue dahil pogi si Sandro Marcos. No? So ito yung mga ganito ka-complex yung naibababa sa atin ng ganitong klaseng mga narratives. And also, isa pa sa mga sikat na sikat ngayon sa TikTok ay sobrang nationalist daw ng mga Marcos dahil si Imelda daw ay nagsusuot ng Filipiniana palagi. So, naibababa na yung discussion of nationalism dahil na lang sa pagsuot ng ganung mga damit. So, nadi-dismiss na yung iba't ibang pang mga issue on corruption, etc. dahil doon sa mga ganung topics. And this is very rampant on TikTok, on Facebook, and also on YouTube. And now, let's proceed to the next speaker. No? Ano naman kaya yung kanyang maiko-contribute regarding our discussion for this afternoon. So our third speaker is an assistant professor of sociology at the University of the Philippines, Visayas, Tacloban College. His research is on the urban political ecology of disaster reconstruction in the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan and critical environmental conservation studies. Let's all welcome Professor Dakila.
Thank you, Professor Kaya Valila. Before my presentation, I would like to ask for permission from the audience that I cannot open my screen because of bad internet. Sorry. Can you confirm if naririnig ako over the chat? Naglalag yung kanina.
No naman sir, malinaw naman po ngayon.
Oh, naglag kanina yung introduction for some reason. I'm just turning off my my video kasi really bad bandwidth. So I would like to thank Professor Gio Giang for inviting me, and also to my co-panelist, Professor Marc Ramota and Dr. Castillo, because they already explained the talk, and so sorry, hindi na ako kailangan expound, biro lang. Some of the points that I will be talking about will touch on what they said. My main focus for this talk is nostalgia, politics, and memes of infrastructure. So it's a bit strange topic, pero ito kasi yung medyo malapit sa teka lang. Sorry na ako dito. So I'm interested in this topic about memes and infrastructure and nostalgia politics of the Marcos Jr. campaign. Yung main argument ko dito is that the vote is not necessarily going to be rational vote, but rather an effective one. Meaning, I usually see, for example, my students or young people, medyo pero for example, ito yung Google Drive ng mga readings, but my observation is that there is a difference, when it comes to the information transmission. If one can get it from memes and one can get it from voluminous readings, medyo may abante yung isa dahil sa kanyang bilis o yung speed. So I want to share this quote by Paul Virilio, one of the French philosophers in the 70s, 80s. History progresses at the speed of its weapons and systems, and I believe that elections can be considered as a warfare in that sense, and who can efficiently use the meme or the internet would be very, very successful. But I want to start first, no, because Professor Giyang, si Gio, asked me to to what can I say about sociological analysis, and I was thinking na it's a bit difficult because I'm not sure kung paano ako magsisimula. But usually, one way that we can look at the sociological analysis is to try to analyze the social demographic basis of and a politician's support, no. So for example, yung ginawa nila Dr. Ronald Holmes in the Duterte Reader, edited by Nicole Corato, analyzed Duterte's campaign, no, based on regional vote as well as class. I'm not sure if the database for these types of studies is open for analysis by external individuals katulad natin. So kung marunong ka maglaro ng SPSS or Stata, you should be able to play around. But I'm not sure if we can do it. Pero I want to share these two surveys, one from 2016 and one from 2021. So 1 month before the elections, as you can see in the vice presidential race, the eventual winner, Vice President Leni Robredo, had a slight lead over the competitor Bongbong Marcos, and eventually ito yung naging outcome, no. And as you can see, no, usually we would analyze votes as something regional in character. So as you can see, Bongbong cornered the Luzon vote, while Leni Robredo consolidated the Visayas support, pati Mindanao support, no. And as you can see in the social classes, so there was a parallel study here that Duterte was the candidate of the middle class and the upper middle class, no. Pero usually eventual winners naman will have a cross class appeal. Kasi it's impossible for a candidate to win if that candidate will not appeal to the D&E vote as well. This is a June 2021 survey. I'm not sure if this is no longer valid, no, but I just want to show this. I tried looking for the Pulse Asia, yung ganito, pwede mong i-copy paste yung picture. Pero I could not see their latest one, and SWS nahirapan din ako maghanap. So this is just to for purposes of illustration lang naman, no. In June 2021, Marcos Jr. was actually third in the list, no. And we don't know how the alliance between the mayor of Davao, presidential daughter Sara Duterte, if this will transfer their vote, the support to Bongbong Marcos. Pero their voting base naman is usually the same. Lord, kung yung if the D&E supporters of Inday Sara is going to transfer to Bongbong Marcos, hindi naman ganun yung ano ni Bongbong Marcos never really packaged himself as a populist candidate, no, as a man of the masses. Now, of course, we want to also illustrate this presentation as also an outcome, or as argued nga by Professor Tihanki from De La Salle, Julio Tihanki, no, na all presidential candidates will deal with their predecessors' kumbaga performance. And before President Duterte, there was what the political scientists in the Philippines would call as the EDSA 1986 consensus, which is a restoration of the liberal democratic institutions, the separation of the three spheres of government, reform of government institutions, also an economic development that is premised on a free market neoliberal ideologies, meaning during the time of Ramos, no, the selling of the government assets and the privatization of those agencies, or the management of government institutions as private parang private yung pag-handle. But I think the very important one and something na nagre-resonate talaga with all of the audience is really and what Professor Castillo also mentioned in his talk is this moral narrative of good versus evil. And so Cory Aquino's the heroine, and the same happened with her son, former President Benigno Aquino, and how they were the hero's heroine against their evil predecessors, no, which was brokered by the Catholic Church, no, symbolized, of course, by the EDSA shrine. Of course, can we say that of course the EDSA 1986 consensus was really ruptured by the Dutertismo campaign, no, disenchantment with the democratic bureaucratic processes, penal populism, or the belief that crime is the number one problem and that we have to do extraordinary measures. The politics of everyday authenticity, no, scholars of Indonesian populist studies may parallelisms with studying Jokowi Widodo with Duterte, na they wear plain polos, eat in humble restaurants, no. But also equally important is machismo as a key component, no, as pointed out by Andoy Evangelista, na nagre-resonate talaga siya doon sa broad population. But is Marcos Jr. a populist? So I think we already mentioned this kanina. No? He is a beneficiary, no, of this repudiation of the 1986 EDSA consensus. So meaning, since the current president repudiated, no, that 1986 consensus, and Marc definitely with the burial of the elder Marcos in the Libingan of the Bayani, then of course it will follow that his son will be a beneficiary. But my argument here is that it's not in a sense yung penal populism ni Rodrigo Duterte was in a way forward-looking. Whether it was the intent or it was the articulation by his advisors and his intellectuals, I cannot really say at this point, no. Pero forward-looking siya in the sense that they aim to address the problems and moving forward in the progression of our country's history. Pero in this sense, my argument here is that it is, and this is already something na na-mention ni Professor Castillo kanina, nostalgia politics, no. So a return to the old. That the problem will be that our decadent present-day condition will be addressed by returning to this old condition. Whether this old condition is factual or is based on narratives, as mentioned in the previous presentation, is probably not important. More so na yun yung device na ginagamit. And then of course, it is abetted, no, or aided by these memes of infrastructure, which is based on this social media industry studied by Jonathan Ong and Jason Cabañez. But also, I was inspired by this when I was listening to the Tech Won't Save Us podcast by Paris Marx, and he was and his guest was Grafton Tanner. An author of a lot of books about nostalgia and big tech, that that social media is or rather parang during one of the part of the latest episode, no, of that podcast, parang the two hosts talked about how we don't remember much of the 2010s. I don't know if that is valid in the Philippine condition, pero parang sometimes we vaguely remember what happened in 2012 or 2013 or even 2016 because of the bombardment that our senses are experiencing by looking at our phones. So yun. And that speed really will benefit, for example, a comeback like what Marcoses are doing now. So so nostalgia nostalgia politics, no? So this is originally defined as an emotion of loss associated with the desire to return to the homeland. So it was actually a medical condition, but now we don't treat it as a medical condition, but as something that, but it's something that is well, an experience, siguro, that actually has a political purpose, no? In the context, for example, the United States, nostalgic politics is really very powerful, no? About as evidenced by Donald Trump's campaign, "Make America Great Again." So it takes a form of a return to tradition, values, essence, and a glorious past. And actually, no, yung time ni Ferdinand Marcos Sr. was actually very if you're a cultural studies scholar, no, you'll get a lot of, it's a gold mine for you kasi the elder Marcos really intent on this construction of an essential Filipino or an essential Maharlika race na as evidence, of course, by the Tasaday incident, when there was a group of what was argued as stone-aged Filipinos or Maharlikans, pero turns out na they are already modern, no, modern na sila na community, and then they were asked to have this performative tribal presentation, no, kasi parang to try to bolster up this idea that there was a glorious race that we need to return to. In this case, the current candidate does not seem to be intent on using that plot line, but is more keen on going back to the 70s. And of course, important for us is the idea of memes, no? Memes can be seen as cultural replicators that spread virally in the sense of genes, no? Richard Dawkins. Pero memes have, the idea of the meme has now transferred out of genetics and biology towards cultural studies, especially in the internet, where they are replicable and spreadable ideas, no? And in terms of politics, no, they are very important because arguably of the humor or the satirical content. Parang siguro in the case of the Philippines, we don't have that rich satirical culture that, for example, America has, no, that yung mga shows nila like the Daily Show, that they can make fun of politics. In our in the Philippines, Willie Nepomuceno used to do that to ERAP, and siguro that's the reason why no one does it now, kasi I think that contributed to the erosion of ERAP's image na lagi siyang ginagawang satirical. So the satire probably transferred from traditional media towards social media. And it has three components. We have content, form, and stance. And this presentation is focused mainly on content. And the form is usually the images that circulate. Although if you go into Marcos fan pages, hindi lang images yung meme, or hindi lang sila yung viral format, but rather you can also see old videos of Imelda, no, Imelda. Speaking of Imelda, no, and the idea that I presented earlier about speed, the elder Marcos was also very about speed. One of the classical narratives here in Leyte is the blitzkrieg romance between Ferdinand Marcos and Imelda. That the romance happened in a relatively short manner of time, no? Parang swept off her feet, ika nga. And so that in that sense, in the 1950s, that made for a particular effective appeal towards that couple, so to speak, no. So in a sense, the speed is really very crucial factor here. So Okay, so I only have 10 minutes left, so I think this is enough time, no? So I want to focus on infrastructure, no? The ideology or the content of the memes or the ideology is mainly focused on infrastructure. And siguro the appeal, the effective appeal of these memes is that they are developmentalist in orientation. And for example, the work of political scientist Dr. Teresa Tadem, no? And other earlier scholars in the Third World Study Center show that the Marcos regime in the 70s, 80s had a developmental component to it. No, but of course it came at particular costs. But of course, gaya nga ng sinabi ni Professor Castillo kanina that the abuses happened during the night. When you see an infrastructure built, you don't necessarily see the workers or the effort or the toil or the labor that goes into those particular built infrastructure. What you see is the grandiose na finishings, ika nga. This is also pointed out by Gavin Shatkin, the urban planner scholar, no, that the 1970s, 80s medyo may pagka-brutalist yung architecture na ginagawa. Of course, the works of Professor Gerard Lico of UP Architecture is also very important. Pero yun, infrastructure is really one of the key memes that is being shared. When you ask, when the supporters point out to the achievements, it's really about infrastructure, and for a good reason, no? As argued by Hetherington, infrastructure constitutes the lived experience, dreams, and aspirations of the body, local communities, and national spaces. So if you're in the regions, if your community has not had a road for the longest time, and then suddenly a road is being built, then of course you are now connected, no, to the scale beyond your community, the scale of the national, the scale of the international. You are now integrated. And your aspirations for progress also happens with that. So, okay. So here I want to share this meme. So I tried searching over Facebook. So medyo blurry lang, but you can see here that some of the infrastructural accomplishments. Of course, Ferdinand Marcos, like many third world leaders, had developmentalist orientation. Sorry, but that orientation, of course, as we now know, no, is really funded by external loans that have been, kumbaga, some of them have been dubious, no, been funneled to cronies, etc. I like this picture. I like this picture in the sense na the dam is really this vision of modernity, as former Indian President Nehru pointed out. Kaya sa India ang daming dams. And then people started protesting against dams in the 1980s because of the effect against the people rather. Pero this is really the classical third world vision, no? Na you have dams, you have this imposition of human labor onto the landscape, onto the natural landscape. And then lastly, I want to share this meme, no, kasi we had that kanina about repudiation of the 1986 politics, and you really can see this. This is a really kumbaga familiar content over a lot of pages about juxtapositions. Of course, memes do not provide context. So in this sense, it's very difficult to really, what do you call this? Deepen the discussion kasi nagiging satirical yung kanyang content eh. So yeah. And so in conclusion, I think that we need to understand, or rather we need to focus on understanding how do you combat nostalgic politics, no? Nostalgia kasi is very important for at an individual level, we tend to look back on past experiences with kumbaga na as a positive experience, and that's how usually this narrative of nung time ng lolo lola ko okay naman. Of course, medyo nag-ano na yung visions natin because of the passage of time, and that's really what nostalgia is. You tend to compare your present condition with a carefree past, di ba? So I'm not sure, no. I don't hindi ako mag ng solution kasi I don't really know the answer, but what I want to highlight is that medyo cultural yung electoral battle. Hindi siya like rationality na parang, oh, if I vote for this candidate, then my money will be used better, mga ganon. Of course, on a more practical level, we see that there are a lot of actors, activists, campaigners who are now trying to reclaim social media and the internet space, no. And for that, I personally laud their efforts, no, kasi if for example you go to TikTok today, no, I'm sure there's a lot of invisible labor that goes into making a TikTok video. So kumbaga hindi lang naman yung pag-post, but rather the curation, the conceptualization, etc. So kumbaga a lot of young people, especially young people, are trying to reclaim the social media and internet space. Siguro my parting point is that if the audience tacitly consents to that particular narrative presented by the Marcoses, how do you counter that, no? Can you counter kumbaga, especially if it's really based on this notion of nostalgia and notions of aspirations, no, yung developmental aspirations na gusto nila. Kaya gusto ng mga botante may images ng kalsada, etc. So that's all for now siguro, and maybe I can explain more in the Q&A. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Yi. Thank you for contextualizing memes, no? Lalo pa na sobrang sikat na ngayon yung mga memes. And also for discussing how memes simplifies issues and problems, and how also it reinforces yung importance of humor lalo pa sa ating mga Pinoy. But at the same time, how it also connects us all, no? Yung oversimplification ng issue, paano niya tayo na-connect. So for our audience, for our live viewers, if meron po kayong questions, you can type it in the comment section of our live stream video on Facebook, and also chat here dito po sa ating chat box. And may I invite all our 3 speakers to open their cameras para po sa ating open forum. Ayan. So I believe we can entertain 2 to 3 questions. Our first question, I think I will be asking this to the 3 of you. Considering all this misinformation and disinformation drives, what do you think is next or will be next for the opposition? So this is a question by Sir Lacan. So considering all this misinformation and disinformation drives, what do you think is next for the opposition? Sir Carl?
Oh, that's actually a tough question. Well, I think the first thing that they should have done, no, in the months leading to the filing of certificates of candidacy, is they should have put their acts together. So I think basic yon, di ba? Every analyst, siguro lahat naman nagsabi na that the opposition will have better chances of winning in the 2022 elections. if they would present a unified front, if they would coalesce and work with each other. Unfortunately, that did not materialize as of the moment, no? So meron tayong nakikita ng mga iba't ibang mga blocks which supposedly identify themselves as opposition to the current dispensation. Ang challenging talaga siguro is how to come up with a message that is powerful enough, that is convincing enough, a message that can be understood in the language easily, in the language by ordinary Filipino, no? By ordinary people, no? Mahirap kasi yung message na ano eh, na at the moment, ang hinahanap ng tao is something concrete. Hindi lang siguro yung rhetoric. So ang advice ko dun sa candidates who identify themselves as opposition, no? Kasi hindi lang naman isa, di ba, na ano, is it's best that they present themselves yung kanilang platform of where they stand on what principles and programs they represent, at while importante yung pagpo-point out ng mga lapses, errors, no? And violations, especially human rights violations of the current dispensation. It's also important for them to solidify yung kanilang image as a potential alternative, as a potential candidate, as a potential leader. So yun yung kailangan nilang i-build up sa kasalukuyan. We're still hopeful na in the weeks and months leading to the elections that these different groups, opposition groups, would sit down and really discuss yung prospects of the national polls. And let's see kung ano, no, if meron pang magiging mga mergers or even realignment. Yun siguro sa akin, yung message and yung identity that they're trying to portray as a viable opposition candidate.
Thanks, Sir Carl. Actually, for the past few months, we have really seen different opposition groups struggling, no, na makapag-come up talaga ng isang strong and pangmalawakang message. Talagang nagsistruggle sila, and even themselves, I think, are also confused on how to come up with these messages. Sir Laurence?
Ang hirap ng tanong actually kasi parang ano to tanong to na ano it forces us to think about the specifics of political strategy, no? And I would really agree dun sa sinabi ni Carl hinggil sa consolidation ng unified opposition, no? I mean, we've been calling for what we called a broad united front, no? But unfortunately, there has been a lot of setbacks. There's been a lot of barriers regarding the talks. We've been hearing all these things about, you know, yung mga stalled talks with Robredo, some faction reaching out, the other closing in. So mga ganun. So yun, of course, yun yung hamon sa mga candidates, no. In terms of the supporters, I think I do not believe that we should completely surrender the social media terrain, no, kasi I understand that we have a very limited stake there kasi we are battling a particular faction na merong milyon na pesos, no. So in terms of the troll machinery, it's very difficult to really challenge that, no. Although we do what we can. I mean, sa mga limited spaces natin, we in a manner that we find most accessible to us and most doable to us. Di kagaya halimbawa nitong Abacada, you understand na para tayong bumabangga sa pader kasi who the hell listens to academics anyway? I mean, there has been a lot of scholarly works about the Marcoses, no, na if we care to just read them, hindi magkakaroon ng ganitong hindi magigain ng ground yung historical distortion sa dami ng pananaliksik na nagpapatunay na kriminal, mamamatay tao, magnanakaw ang mga Marcos, but nobody listens to academics. So I think, no, yung platform na nabuo ng Abacada exemplifies how we should not really give up, no, despite the fact that it seems that nobody listens to us. It seems that like we are just a cry in the wilderness. bukod pa dyan, sa hanay natin mga educators, syempre, i-transform natin yung mga classroom natin into spaces for ano, for political clarity, I would think, no? And ano, kasi ako ay naniniwala pa rin ako ultimately, political awakening begins with, you know, two people talking to one another. So it can be as simple as that, no? Parang napakaliit niya in the broader scale of things, but I think, no, parang bahagi kasi yun talaga nung demand natin for political work, for political mobilization. And that is something that we can probably do as supporters of opposition candidates, no? Although yun pa nga kung magkakaroon nga ng consolidated opposition, aba po pwedeng pakibilisan para alam namin kung sino exactly yung i-endorse natin, no? So I understand that, you know, there are figures that we have already narrowed down to certain figures anyway. So we just hope to gain some more political clarity about support, kasi in battling what we call the narrowest target, it's really necessary to pinpoint first kanino ba tayo magrarally behind. So ayun po.
Thanks, Sir Laurence. Actually, importante nga din talaga yun that we maximize all the spaces that we have right now to really open up conversations, no? Makapag-start lang tayo makipag-usap sa isa't isa. I think it's already a good start. Sir Yi?
Yeah. Of course, hindi naman ano, I mean the tama yung sinabi ni Professor Castillo, no, that it's already about the matter of political strategy. We are not in the decision making body. Pero sige, to ano, I think a developmentalist vision, of course, that's something na pwedeng articulate, magkaroon ng coherent na messaging. Kasi when you look at these memes about this nostalgic desire to have the Marcoses back, really focus on a lot of the constructions that they have made. And tama naman yung point na 20 years wala kang mapagawa, di ba? Imposible naman yun. So that's why path dependency, meron talaga silang infrastructure na ginawa. Pero yun nga, kasi binabalik-balikan pa rin nila yung achievements na iyon. So kumbaga, yun yung content nung campaigns. Of course, pwede naman i-atake at ginagawa na rin naman yun. But I think equally important is also to try to have the what is really the vision for development of the Filipinos, yung ganon, no. Going back kasi dun sa yung pinupunto na the art of moral good and evil, no. I'm not really sure if that's going to be a resonant framing. I'm not sure if that will resonate with the public, yung narrative ng good versus evil. So yun, and I think I'm still seeing that framing. Marami namang supporters of opposition candidates who are organizing, even here in Leyte. They focus on achievements, the good deeds, the capabilities. So I think that's a good start. Candidate bashing, or siguro kailangan yan siya, pag-isipan yung ganun. And also, of course, the bashing of the supporters, that's definitely a no-no. We cannot convert potential voters pag we resort to candidate bashing. We will benefit from listening to them. Listening, bakit nila sinusuportahan ito? Kahit ito yung mga naisulat tungkol sa kanila. And maybe we will know what is the basis, and siguro that's what I wanted also to show, na ito nga may isa nga silang gustong packaging ng kanilang kandidato. So yun.
Thanks, Sir Yi. Actually, branching out from that point, we have this next question. What do you think about the aspect of these Filipinos that seem to easily forget and forgive, as shown in the election of Bong Revilla and the strong showing of Marcos Jr. in the polls. So what do we think about this? How do we make sense of these characteristics of the Filipinos? Sir Carl?
Makakalimutin lang ba talaga yung mga Pilipino or di ba kanina yung ginamit kong salita ay it's very easy to blame the voters for unfortunate election results, no? Yung mga outcomes na, but just like what I highlighted earlier, yung ganong klaseng claim also presupposes that they in fact had a choice, especially in local politics, that is dominated by the same family. So, sino pa iboboto ng mga nandoon mismo sa locality if the vice mayor is the brother of the mayor and the congressman of the first representative is also a sibling of the two? Sige, ilagay na lang sa chat box kung anong syudad sa South ang tinutukoy ko sa kasalukuyan, di ba? Pero that's the reality, especially in local politics. The choices, those choices are also constrained. I think the challenge really is how concerned individuals, groups eventually should venture into building viable networks that eventually could be transformed into political parties. Nakita natin yung merong mga efforts na ganito in the past, although walang naging follow through, and they were also viciously attacked by well-oiled machineries and parties, no? Especially sa mga lokal na ano. So yun ang tingin ko na isang maaring pagtuunan ng pansin. Yung sa pagiging makakalimutin na it's really a battle of narratives, as a battle of ideas. At ang kailangan gawin is just continue to speak out, no? Reach more platforms, and not just online platforms. While these webinars are good, no? Tandaan natin na hindi Facebook, hindi TikTok, hindi Twitter pa rin ang while they are let me clarify that I'm not dismissing these online platforms or virtual platforms as viable sources of information, but we must also transform and translate what is virtual into real. What we need to go to the communities themselves kung saan na hindi necessarily naaabot ng mga online platforms na ito. Tandaan natin na hindi rin lahat ng mga netizens are members of the electorate. Hindi lahat sila ay So, kailangan hanapin kung sino talaga yung mga registered voters. And a number of them are not really regular internet users. So, it must be a combination still of using traditional media, the social media, and of course the painstaking, the cumbersome process of campaigning in the ground. Yun talaga ang kailangan gawin. So solid na organizing efforts. Actually yun yung ginawa nung kasalukuyang administrasyon, di ba? Nakikita natin sila that they are dominant in the social media, but they also went to the communities and organized their ano nga ba pangalan nun, yung mga pagbabago ng mga party nila na and that was widespread. And supposedly that was to be used as machinery for the Chacha then, na kung natatanda niya at the height of the Chacha. Pero those efforts represented yung vision na to go to the ground, to organize na Hindi kasi yung katulad na banggit nila Laurence, nila Laurence sa Dakila kanina. Hindi na kasi maaaring umubra yung dating mga strategy, especially those which were employed in the 2016 national elections. portraying themselves as yung kami ang worthy, kami ang karapat-dapat, kami ang kami lang ang viable, no? That's in fact the kind of messaging that separated them from ordinary people. So yun na nga, kailangan talaga ng ang challenge pa rin is what kind of message would resonate most would resonate to the most number of people, and that the kind of campaign and messages that these parties, these candidates should generate are the ones that can be easily understood in the language that can be easily understood by communities, by ordinary Filipinos. Yun yung tingin ko.
Thank you, Sir Carl. Sir Laurence, anything to add doon sa pagiging makakalimutin daw ng mga Pinoy?
Ano ba yun? Tingin ko kasi hindi makakalimutin eh. Mas alarmed ako at least based on my conversations with mga kamag-anak ko, mga kaibigan na boboto kay BBM, no, na parang they're willing to overlook the fact that they plundered. Parang minsan hindi na nga pinagdedebatehan, sige, granted, nagnakaw naman talaga. Yung mga Revilla, for example, parang even though sinasabi na hindi naman sila convicted of plunder, parang even for the ordinary public, 'di ba? Parang it's accepted na nagnakaw, pero still you would vote for them. Yeah, tama yung binanggit ni Carl na maybe it's also a matter of the fact that the choices are compromised in the first place. Parang the practice is already compromised, so you have very limited people to choose from. Another is the fact that corruption has been imagined as some sort of a normative practice anyway. Everybody's committing it, so it's really just a matter of who delivers, despite pocketing parts of public money. So siguro mas siya, nababasa ko bilang it's a kind of learned helplessness, no, rather than blatant forgetting, kasi people know that these people are thieves. People know that there's corruption, even though technically wala naman din talaga kasing nakulong sa kanila. Parang ilan lang ba talaga yung na-convict for plunder sa Pilipinas? Halos wala din naman, di ba? Parang yun nga yung mas haggard dun eh. In fact, the fact na wala pang nako-convict, ibig sabihin dapat yung mga tao hindi nila tinatanggap na normative ang plunder. Pero you don't even need any juridical validation for these plunder accusations eh. Kasi it's kind of accepted that they plunder anyway. So mas naiisip ko siya bilang parang cultural or siguro political expression of learned helplessness, na it's so normative, it's so widespread, everybody's committing it. So why focus on plunder issue? Parang kaya nga inisip ko, baka pag retrofit tayo ng messaging natin tungkol kay Marcos, baka yung plunder issue ay hindi na siya yung pinaka-powerful, unfortunately, no, na core ng political rhetoric natin to dissuade people from voting for Marcos. Kasi totoo naman, binanggit ko na may ganitong historical denialism na nagnakaw ang mga Marcos, no, pero for many people, they accept it na nagnakaw sila pero Kebs, wala na kaming pakialam kasi meron kang CCP, meron kang heart center, meron kang, 'di ba, yung may tawag nila Bopis complex ba 'yon, kasi parang 'di ba heart center, lung center, among other things. So nakikita nila so it's the kind of frustrating mentality that underpins all these political choices, that they readily accept the reality of corruption and they're okay with it. So that is something that we really have to get around, no? Paano natin i-counter yung ganung klase ng mentality, and how we can actually create a different or enable a different kind of political mentality, political imagination for people, given all the choices that they are forced to choose from are compromised anyway. So siguro yun yung pag-iisipan pa natin.
Actually, sa TikTok na, talagang yung mga videos ay pag may mga nagko-comment na magnanakaw naman yan, may mag-reply, okay lang, may napagawa naman siya, na parang, kaya pa naging okay ang pagnanakaw. But yeah, sige, Sir Yi, anything to add?
Thank you. So, tama yung sinabi ni Professor Carl and of course Professor Laurence about the need to organize. I think Professor Laurence mentioned it earlier. Totoo naman talaga, no, that social media is not the only terrain. There is also the everyday terrain. And to answer the question, no, before this event, yung iniisip ko, i-share sana yung article ni Marco Garrido. He's a sociologist, Filipino sociologist in the US. May article siya, From Personal Opinion to Social Fact, Interactional Dynamics and the Corroboration of Populist Support. So pinag-aralan niya yung isang community sa Quezon City that supported ERAP in 1998 and also supported them in 2001 EDSA 3. So may apat siyang yung argument niya doon is interactional yung politika. Which is also what you will encounter if you do on the ground organizing. You will meet a lot of people na will not agree with what you're going to say, no? So itong nabanggit niya ng mga nangyayari. There is corroboration, so meaning people will corroborate what they say about a particular candidate. There is construction, the people will construct an image of that particular candidate. There is confusion, talking to each other. You manage to convert the position of another person. This is what basically people on Twitter say as a community. And then censure, meaning on an everyday basis, they'll shout at you. Actually, disasters, pero nag-timing din na election 26 ay kami, Duterte kami. Meaning that there was a process of people really, kumbaga, to go to the to people, baka hindi. Kasi politics is an interaction. So if the family is a supporter or the community, a lot of supporters, then of course will have to navigate that particular reality. Even if we have objective facts about what happened, people will construct their version of what happened, di ba? Unfortunately, yun di ba? Post-truth yung situation eh. But yeah, so siguro kung yung point na makakalimutin ba sila or forgetful ba sila, probably not. But maybe the process of everyday interaction, their politics were shaped by it. Hindi ko lang siya ginawang presentation kasi I don't have a fieldwork data of Marcos supporters, pero most likely this will be the case. And I think Garrido made a point towards the end na parang may social belonging na nangyayari. Actually, even in the families, di ba? A lot of families supporters. So if you're one out kasi taga-UP ka, taga-PUP, Ateneo, di ba? Parang you're now confronted with that interactional dynamic. So yeah, yun. Politics is not just a set of kumbaga may menu tayo sent sa atin, of menu of objective facts, and we select it. Unfortunately, it's really a manner of dealing with other people. And if those people have contrary political stance to yours, kumbaga now you are nga. So yan, siguro other people will now kasi it's now the 2022 election, so they will be in a better position to understand the dynamics of Marcos supporters, so to speak, on the ground. So yan.
Thank you, Sir Yi. And probably last question, and you can just raise your virtual hand na lang or yung okay sign. Pwede daw po ba kayong isite sa papers yung mga discussion niyo po for today? Oh, yes daw. Parang yes naman. Nakikita ko naman yes. Sir Yi?
Okay naman. For papers, yeah.
Sige. So thank you po. Maraming salamat po sa ating speakers this afternoon, and of course to all of our attendees here in Zoom, and also sa mga nanonood po sa ating live stream sa Facebook. And please follow our Facebook page, yung Abacada at 2021 Abacada, para po sa mga susunod na webinars pa ng Abacada. So again, thank you so much po, and magandang hapon.
Thank you.
Salamat po.
Salamat.
Thank you po. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sir Lau. Thank you, Sir Carl at Sir Dakila. Thank you.
Salamat, Sir Gio.
Sa uulitin po.
Salamat.
Thank you po sa inyo.